For 15 years, every Saturday my husband would leave to play cards with his friends. When one of them died and his widow knocked on my door crying, I discovered that my entire marriage was built on the suffering of hundreds of poor families. My name is Mrs. Sebastiana, but everyone calls me Mrs. Tiana. I'm 78 years old today, and what I'm going to tell you happened a long time ago, back in the years from 1968 to 1973, when I was between 33 and 38 years old. It's a story I've carried in my chest for decades, and one that changed my life forever. Before I begin, I'd like to ask something of you who are watching. If this story touches your heart, please leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel to hear more stories of overcoming adversity, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing that my words reach so many different places. You can comment your city. I want to get to know each one of you. Well, my story begins back in 1953 when I married Albertino. I was only 18 years old. He was 25. It was an arranged marriage by our families, as was common in those days. My father was a railroad worker, worked for the railroad company, and Albertino's father had a small auto repair shop there in the working-class neighborhood on the east side of Detroit. It wasn't a wealthy family, but they were honest, hard-working, good people, or at least that's what I thought. The first years were difficult, like every new marriage. We lived in a small rented two-room house, very simple. I took in laundry to help with expenses, and Albertino worked as a mechanic with his father. We didn't have much, but we also didn't lack the basics: rice, beans, a piece of meat when we could afford it. I sewed our clothes, patched everything until I couldn't anymore. It was the life we knew. We had 3 children. Little Paul was born in 1954, Marianne in 1956, and the youngest, Joey, in 1959. My life revolved around them and the house. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning to make coffee, prepare Albertino's lunchbox, get the children ready. Back then, honey, we didn't have these conveniences of today. There was no washing machine, no refrigerator. We had a screened cabinet to store food. There was no television. The first TV only arrived at our house in 1965, black and white, tiny. Albertino was always a man of few words, serious, hard-working, didn't drink, didn't smoke. He'd go to work early in the morning and come back in the late afternoon. He'd have dinner, talk little with the children, read the newspaper, and go to bed early. On Sundays, he'd go to Mass with me and the boys. He wasn't very religious, but he'd go out of respect for the appearance we had to maintain in the neighborhood. But there was one thing that was sacred in his routine. Every Saturday night, after dinner, he'd take a bath, get dressed up, put that hair cream in his hair, those that had a strong smell, you probably remember, and leave. "I'm going to play cards with friends, Tiana," he'd say. And he'd go. He always came back late, 2, 3 in the morning. Sometimes he'd arrive earlier around midnight. This started around 1958 when Joey was still a baby. At first, I thought it was strange. I'd ask where it was, who it was with. He said it was at Mr. Oswald's house, a friend of his from the shop, that there were about 5, 6 men, all people known in the neighborhood. They played gin rummy, poker, bet a few bucks, nothing major. "Men's stuff, Tiana. Let us have some fun," he'd say. And what could I do? Back then, women didn't question their husbands. We were raised to obey, to take care of the house and children and let men do whatever they wanted as long as they brought home the income. My mother always said, "Tiana, men need freedom. Don't nag him, don't ask too many questions, or you'll lose him." I believed that. I believed that was my role. So every Saturday was the same thing. I'd put the children to bed, wait for him to leave, and stay there alone sewing or listening to the radio quietly so as not to wake the boys. Sometimes the neighbor women would come keep me company. Mrs. Irene, Mrs. Zelda. We'd have coffee, talk about the children, about the radio soap operas. After the TV arrived, we'd watch together, but deep down I was just waiting for him to arrive. The strange thing is that over the years, things started to improve a lot at home. Around 1963, 1964, Albertino started bringing home more money. We bought a refrigerator, television. He replaced our old kitchen table with a new Formica one, which was every housewife's dream, those colorful, shiny tables. He renovated the entire house, put in new flooring, painted everything. He even bought a Volkswagen Beetle in 1966, a light blue Beetle, brand new. Gosh, I felt like the luckiest woman in the neighborhood. When I asked where this extra money came from, he said it was because his father's shop had grown, that he was doing some extra work on Saturday afternoons, that people were paying well for urgent services. It made sense, right? The economy was growing at that time. America was booming. There was a lot going on. I never suspected. The other women in the neighborhood were even envious. "Oh, Tiana, how lucky you are. Albertino is so hard-working, such a good husband," they'd say, and I'd agree proudly. I thought I had been lucky, that I had a husband who took good care of the family. The card-playing friends I knew by sight. There was Mr. Oswald, who was the owner of the house where they met. A tall, thin man, always with a hat. There was Mr. Maurice, short, chubby, who worked at a warehouse. There was Mr. George, who was a truck driver. There was Mr. Waldemar, who had a small store. And there were 2 or 3 others that I'd see occasionally on the street, but didn't know well. All married men, with families, people who seemed normal, hard-working. Sometimes they'd meet on the street during the week, talk on the corner, and I'd see them from afar when I went to the grocery store. But it was always quick conversation, men's stuff talking about football, politics, work. I never thought anything strange. What I found a little odd, but tried not to think too much about it, was that Albertino never took money for these Saturdays. I mean, he said he did, but I never saw him take any bills from the drawer where we kept money, and when he came back he never had won anything in the game. Or if he had won, he didn't bring it home. He said he'd win here, lose there, that in the end it came out about even. There was also something strange. Sometimes he'd arrive nervous, get home, drink a glass of water quickly, go straight to bed, without saying anything to me. He'd be restless, tossing and turning in bed. I'd ask, "Did something happen?" And he'd grumble, "Nothing, let me sleep." The next day he'd wake up normal, as if nothing had happened. And there were the phone calls. Oh, those damn phone calls. We installed the phone at home in 1967. It was a luxury back then. Few houses had them. Albertino said it was important for business, that clients needed to call to schedule service at the shop. But it was strange because they'd call a lot on Saturdays, always in the morning or early afternoon. And he'd always answer, listen in silence, say, okay, I'll handle it, and hang up quickly. When I asked who it was, he'd say, "Annoying customer wanting urgent service, forget about it." Once in 1969, I answered the phone, and it was a woman's voice crying. She asked to speak with Albertino, said it was urgent. I called him, and when he answered, he had a look on his face. Wow, a look I'd never seen. Serious, hard, cold. He spoke quietly. "Monday, we'll resolve this. Don't call here anymore," and hung up. I stood there staring at him, and he looked at me with anger in his eyes. "Don't go snooping in my life, Tiana. These are work things you don't understand." That hurt me, but I swallowed hard and went to take care of dinner. Women weren't supposed to meddle in their husbands' affairs. That's what everyone said. The years passed, and the Saturdays continued religiously. Rain or shine, holiday or not, Albertino would go to play cards. When the boys grew up and started asking questions, "Dad, why do you play cards every Saturday?" He'd answer curtly, "Because men need their time, boy. When you grow up, you'll understand." And he'd change the subject. There was a time in 1971 when Marianne, who was already 15 years old, told me she had seen her father in a distant neighborhood in the back of the city near the shantytown. She had gone to visit a friend who lived nearby. "Mom, I saw Dad in the car talking with some men who looked like bad guys, and it wasn't Saturday. It was on a Thursday afternoon." I froze, but defended him. "Daughter, you must have seen wrong. Your father was working at the shop at that time." She insisted it was him, but I didn't want to believe or rather, didn't want to face the truth, because deep down, way deep down, I already knew something was wrong. A woman senses these things, but I was afraid. Afraid of discovering an affair, which was what every woman feared. Afraid of losing the marriage, of being alone with 3 children, of becoming the subject of neighborhood gossip. So I pushed those suspicions to the back of my head and went on with life. Until one Friday in March 1973, I'll never forget that day. It was the day before Easter. The news ran through the neighborhood. Mr. Oswald had died. Massive heart attack right there at his house on Thursday night. They found him fallen in the living room, already lifeless. The wake was on Saturday morning, and of course Albertino and I went. After all, he was his card-playing friend for so many years. At the wake, Albertino was different. Pale, sweating, nervous. He kept looking at the other men in the group, Mr. Maurice, Mr. George, Mr. Waldemar, and they were also strange, exchanging looks, talking in corners, whispering. Mr. Oswald's widow, Mrs. Conception, was devastated, but there was something in her eyes. It wasn't just sadness, it was fear, real terror. When she saw me, she looked at me in a way that gave me chills, as if she wanted to tell me something but couldn't. I offered my condolences, gave my sympathies, but I felt her squeeze my hand hard, almost desperately. I didn't understand anything. Albertino wanted to leave the wake quickly. We barely stayed an hour. On the way home, he was in absolute silence. Didn't say a word the entire way. When we arrived, he locked the bedroom door and stayed in there. I heard him walking from one side to the other, walking like a caged animal. I tried to talk. "Albertino, are you okay? I know your friend's death shook you." He opened the door and looked at me with a look, my God, it was like I was looking at a stranger. "Don't talk about it, Tiana. Don't talk about it anymore. And if anyone comes here asking anything, you don't know anything, understand? Nothing." That terrified me. What story was that? Ask what? But I didn't have the courage to insist. He went back to the room and locked the door again. On Saturday night, the first Saturday without cards, he didn't go out. He stayed home restless, nervous, looking out the window at every noise. Sunday, too. Monday he went to work but came back early. And all the time he'd answer the phone and speak quietly. Always the same thing. "Calm down. We'll wait a few days." I was confused, scared, not understanding anything. Until Wednesday, around 3 in the afternoon, someone knocked on my door. It was Mrs. Conception, Mr. Oswald's widow, and she had a bag full of old notebooks in her hands, with red eyes from crying so much, trembling all over. When I opened the door and saw Mrs. Conception standing there, with that bag in her hands and that desperate look, my heart raced. She was thin, pale. It looked like she had aged 10 years in a few days. Her hands were shaking so much that the bag was swaying, and I could hear the sound of notebooks moving inside. "Mrs. Tiana," she said with a choked voice. "I need to talk to you. Please, it's very important. Are you alone?" I looked behind me. Albertino was at work, the kids at school. Little Paul was already working too, he was 19, but still lived with us. Marianne was at school, she was 17. Joey, at 14, was also in class. "I'm alone, yes, Mrs. Conception. Please come in. Would you like some coffee, some water?" She came in, but didn't want to sit. She stood there in my living room, holding that bag as if it were the most precious and most terrible thing in the world at the same time. She was shaking so much I was afraid she'd get sick. "Sit down, Mrs. Conception, for God's sake. You're very nervous." She finally sat on the edge of the sofa, put the bag on her lap, and started crying. It wasn't that cry of someone who lost their husband. I had already seen her crying at the wake. It was different. It was a cry of shame, of terror, of desperation, a cry that came from a very deep place. I sat next to her, took her hand, and waited. I didn't know what to say. After a few minutes, she wiped her tears with the back of her hand and looked at me with those red eyes. "Mrs. Tiana, you've always been good to me. We've known each other for so many years, live in the same neighborhood, our children played together. That's why I need to warn you. I need to show you what I found. Because you deserve to know the truth before it's too late." My stomach turned. Too late for what? What truth? "What are you talking about, Mrs. Conception?" She opened the bag slowly, as if opening a box of venomous snakes, and she started taking out notebooks. Old notebooks, those composition books you'd buy at the stationery store, some with green covers, others red, others blue. There must have been about 8 notebooks there. She placed everything on the coffee table carefully, as if they were evidence of a crime. After my Oswald died, I was organizing his things, the documents, the clothes, those things you have to do when you lose someone. Then I found these notebooks hidden at the bottom of his closet inside an old locked suitcase. I had to break the padlock because I couldn't find the key. She opened one of the notebooks, and I saw page after page full of names written by hand, with that careful handwriting of someone who studied up to elementary school. And next to the names were numbers, many numbers, dates, amounts. At first, I didn't understand what it was. I thought it was household accounts, his work notes. But then I started reading carefully, and her voice failed. She turned a page, then another, and kept pointing with her trembling finger. "Look here, Mrs. Tiana, look at what's written. Maria Silva loaned $500 in January '68, 20% interest per month, already paid $2,300 and still owes $800. And below, we took her sewing machine as collateral. And there's more. If she doesn't pay by April, we'll go to her house again." I looked at it without understanding. She turned more pages. "There are hundreds of names here, Mrs. Tiana. Hundreds. John Pereira owes $1,200. We took the radio and his son's bicycle. Antonia Costa owes $2,500, already been warned 3 times. Peter Santana doesn't want to pay. Maurice and George will handle it. And look at this." She pointed to a note that chilled my blood. "Sebastian Mora didn't want to pay. Taught him a lesson in front of his family. Now he'll think twice." I still wasn't understanding properly. Or rather, I was understanding. But my head refused to accept. "Mrs. Conception, what? What is this?" She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, there were tears streaming down. "These are the records of a loan sharking operation, Mrs. Tiana. My husband, your husband, and the other men who went every Saturday to play cards, they didn't play cards at all. They loaned money to poor people, desperate people, charging absurd interest rates. And when the person couldn't pay, they'd take their belongings, humiliate them, threaten them, beat them. No, it can't be true. No, my Albertino, he's a hard-working man, honest, goes to Mass every Sunday. There must be some mistake, Mrs. Conception. My husband is a mechanic. He works at his father's shop. He never—" "Mrs. Tiana," she interrupted me, and her voice was firm now, despite the tears. "Look here. Look at this notebook." She grabbed a different notebook, newer, with a black hardcover. She opened it to the first page, and there, written in large letters, was "General Control, 1972, 1973, Albertino." My world collapsed in that second. There was my husband's name on the cover of a notebook full of names of desperate people, unpayable debts, threats, violence. "He was the boss, Mrs. Tiana," she said quietly. "Oswald wrote at the beginning of this notebook here. Look, Albertino coordinates the collections. Maurice and George do the heavy work. Waldemar keeps the money and objects. I make the contacts and get the clients." She continued leafing through, showing me page after page. It was all there. The names of people, most I didn't know, but some were from the neighborhood. Domestic workers who borrowed money to pay for medicine for a sick child. Workers who needed money for rent. Single mothers who had no way to buy food. Simple people, poor, desperate. And the interest rates were cruel. 20–30% per month. People who borrowed $500 ended up owing $3,000–4,000 and could never pay. Then came the notes about special collections. Look at this. Mrs. Conception turned to a page from August 1972. Josefa Lima owes 2,000, has nothing left to give. Albertino authorized strong collection. George and Maurice went there on a Sunday morning. She paid $500 the same day. I felt nauseous. Strong collection. What had they done to that poor woman? And there was worse, much worse. Mrs. Conception arrived at a page marked with a piece of paper, as if she had left it there on purpose to show me. "Read this, Mrs. Tiana. Read." It was written, "Manuel Ferreira owes 1,800, doesn't want to pay. Says he's already paid more than double what he borrowed. Albertino ordered to give him a scare. George burned his market stall. Next day, he showed up with the money. They burned a man's market stall. They destroyed his livelihood because of money. And there's more," she continued relentlessly. She needed me to see everything, to understand the gravity. "There's this from February this year." The note said, "Carlos Mendez, 45 years old, can't pay anymore, is sick. Maurice went to collect, and his wife cried, saying she had nothing. Albertino decided to wait until the man gets better or dies to collect from the widow. Wait for the man to die to collect from the widow. My God in heaven, what kind of monster? I couldn't breathe properly. The room was spinning. That man who had slept next to me for 15 years, who was the father of my children, who sat at the table with me every day, who went to Mass with me, was a cruel loan shark, a man who destroyed poor families. And I, unknowingly, had benefited from that dirty money. The refrigerator, the television, the Formica table, the beetle, the children's new clothes, the house renovations, everything had been bought with the suffering of innocent people. "Why are you showing me this?" I managed to ask with my voice coming out weak, trembling. "Why now?" Mrs. Conception grabbed my hand tightly. "Because there's more, Mrs. Tiana. Very serious stuff. Oswald didn't die of a heart attack just because. He had been desperate for weeks. There was a case, a terrible case that happened in January." She turned to the end of the notebook, to the last written pages, Mr. Oswald's last notes before dying. "Raul Tavares, 38 years old, metalworker, borrowed $800 in November 72 to pay for his daughter's doctor who had pneumonia. Already paid $2,100, but the debt doesn't stop growing. Can't pay anymore. Albertino authorized severe collection." And below, dated January 15, 1973, it was written in shaky handwriting, different from the other notes, as if the person was nervous writing. "George and Maurice went to Raul's house when his wife and daughter weren't there. Beat him badly, broke his fingers. He can't work anymore. I'm afraid of what we did." And there was more. Dated January 20th. "Raul Tavares hanged himself in his shack. His wife found him. Police are asking questions. Albertino told everyone to stay quiet. I can't sleep." I let out a scream. I couldn't control it. A man had killed himself. A family man had taken his own life because of a debt he could never pay, because of money borrowed to save his daughter. And my husband had ordered the collection. My husband had authorized breaking that man's fingers. My husband had blood on his hands. Oswald was very sick after that. Mrs. Conception continued crying. He started having nightmares, stopped eating properly, told me everything one night, said he couldn't carry that anymore. Said that Raul had looked at him once on the street before dying, with a look of desperation he'd never forget. He wanted to stop, wanted to return the notebooks to the families, wanted to fix everything, but was afraid of Albertino. Said your husband was dangerous, that he had contact with a corrupt cop who protected the scheme, that if anyone snitched, they'd be killed. Corrupt cop, protection. This was much bigger than I imagined. Then, on Thursday of last week, he said he was going to talk to Albertino, that he was going to say he wanted out, that he'd hand over his part and end it. He left the house nervous, came back worse. Said Albertino had threatened him, said once you're in, you don't get out, that he knows a lot of people, that he should think about his children before doing something stupid. She wiped her face with an old handkerchief she took from her purse. That same night, he had the heart attack. I think I think it was really his heart, you know? But it was the weight of guilt that killed him. It was not being able to live with that anymore. And now I have these notebooks, scared, not knowing what to do. Because if I take them to the police, who's going to guarantee me that the cop I look for isn't the same one who protected them? And if it is, I'll die too. My children will be orphans. I was paralyzed, holding those notebooks in my hands. They were proof of years of crimes, of suffering, of destroyed lives. And there in the middle was my husband's name, coordinating everything. Do the others know you found the notebooks? I asked. They know I found something. Maurice already came here asking if Oswald had left any documentation. I said no, that I only found clothes and personal documents, but I think they didn't believe me. They're nervous. They're meeting. I saw them at Waldemar's house before coming here. My God, if they found out she was here with me, showing me all this. You shouldn't have come here, Mrs. Conception. It's dangerous. If they know... I know it's dangerous, she almost shouted. But I couldn't stay quiet, Mrs. Tiana. I couldn't. That man killed himself. There are families going hungry because they gave even the last plate from their house to pay debt to these men. And you're a victim too. You live with a man you don't really know. You deserve to know. She stood up nervously. And there's one more thing. There are people looking for them, relatives of the victims. A son of Raul Tavares is looking to know who did that to his father. A woman who lost her house is saying she's going after whoever made her lose everything. People are starting to talk to each other, putting the pieces together. And when they discover who the loan sharks are, Mrs. Tiana, these people will want revenge. And you live with one of them, with their boss. The blood drained from my face. Revenge. My children lived in this house. They were in danger and didn't even know. What do I do? I asked, and my voice came out like a desperate whisper. Mrs. Conception, tell me what I do. She grabbed her purse, arranged her handkerchief, and looked at me with those tired red eyes. I don't know, Mrs. Tiana. I came here because you deserve to know the truth. What to do with this truth? That's something you'll have to decide. But decide quickly, because time is running out for everyone. She headed toward the door, but before leaving turned one last time. These notebooks are now yours. I made copies of the main pages and hid them in a safe place. If something happens to me, there are people who know where they are, but the originals, I can't keep them in my house. They'll search everything there sooner or later. At least here with you, they won't suspect at first. But hide them well and be careful. And she left, leaving me there alone with those damn notebooks on the coffee table. I stood still for, I don't know how long, could be 5 minutes, could be an hour, just looking at those notebooks, at those names, at those numbers that represented destroyed lives. I picked them up one by one and started reading. I read everything. Every name, every debt, every note about collections, about threats, about violence. There were people who had lost their homes, people who had lost their jobs because they broke their hand or leg in a collection. Women who had been humiliated in front of their children, children who had seen their parents beaten. And worse, on several pages there were notes like, paid with the refrigerator, paid with the radio, paid with the bicycle, paid with the sewing machine. And suddenly I remembered our refrigerator, our television, so many things we had at home. Could they be from these families? Could the refrigerator where I kept my children's food have been taken from a mother who needed it so her baby's milk wouldn't spoil? I vomited right there in the living room trash can. Vomited until there was nothing left in my stomach. When I managed to compose myself a bit, I looked at the clock. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. Joey would arrive from school in half an hour. Marianne soon after. Albertino came back from work at 6. I had little time. I took all the notebooks, put them back in the bag and went to hide them. Couldn't leave them in an obvious place. I thought of several places, under the bed, in the closet, in the kitchen, but they all seemed too easy to find, until I had an idea. In the backyard we had a laundry sink, one of those concrete ones. Under the sink there was an empty space like a built-in cabinet where we kept soap, bucket, those things. But at the back of that space, there were some old boards that my father-in-law had left there when he built the covered sink with an old cloth. I went there, took everything out, lifted the boards, and hid the bag with the notebooks way in the back, well hidden. I covered them with the boards again, put the cloth on top, and arranged the buckets and soap in front. No one would look there. It was a woman's place, housework. Men didn't even go near that. I went back inside, washed my face, tidied the living room, tried to look normal, but inside, I was shattered. How was I going to look at Albertino when he arrived? How was I going to sit at the dinner table with him, knowing what I knew? How was I going to lie in the same bed as that man? And the question that tormented me most, did I have to do something with that information? Did I have a moral obligation to report? But what if by reporting I put my children in danger? What if the corrupt cop came after us? What if the victims, wanting revenge, didn't distinguish between Albertino and the rest of the family? I was married to a monster, and for 15 years, unknowingly, I had been his accomplice. Joey arrived from school at 5 o'clock, as always. He came in through the kitchen door, threw his backpack on the floor, and went straight to get a glass of water. "Mom, what's for snack? I'm starving." I was standing there in front of the stove, looking at the pot of beans boiling, but not seeing anything. My head was far away, thinking about those notebooks hidden in the sink, about the destroyed families, about the man who had hanged himself. "Mom, are you okay?" Joey's voice brought me back. I turned and forced a smile. "I am, son, just tired. There's bread with butter and cornbread I made yesterday." He grabbed the snack and went to the backyard to play ball. Marianne arrived half an hour later, complaining about a math test, about an annoying teacher, those teenage things. I responded automatically, nodding, pretending I was paying attention, but inside I was rehearsing how I was going to act when Albertino arrived. Would I be able to pretend I didn't know anything? Would he notice something different about me? I was never a good liar. I was always too transparent. My mother always said that. "Tiana, you can't hide anything. Everything you feel shows on your face," she'd say. At 6 o'clock sharp, I heard the sound of the Beatles stopping in front of the house. My heart raced. My hands started shaking. I was cutting tomato for salad, and the knife almost slipped from my fingers. The door opened, his footsteps in the living room, the sound of his work briefcase being placed on the chair, his voice calling, "Tiana, bring me some water. I'm thirsty." That voice, the same voice I had heard for 15 years. The voice that greeted me in the morning, that talked to the boys, that prayed the rosary with me on Sundays. How could that same voice have ordered them to break a man's fingers? How could that voice have threatened poor families? I grabbed a glass, filled it with cold water from the refrigerator, that refrigerator bought with dirty money, and took it to the living room. He was sitting on the sofa, taking off his shoes, with the newspaper beside him. When I came in, he looked up at me, and in that moment, I was sure he would know, would look at my face, and know something had changed. But he just took the glass, drank all the water at once, and said, "Is dinner almost ready? I'm hungry." Almost, yes. About 15 more minutes. He nodded and opened the newspaper. I went back to the kitchen trembling. I did it. I managed to seem normal, or at least he hadn't noticed anything. Dinner was torture. Sitting there at the table, me, him, Marianne, and Joey. Little Paul had gone out with his girlfriend. We ate in silence, as was customary. Albertino was never one to talk much during meals, but that silence was suffocating me. I looked at him chewing, drinking water, wiping bread in the beans, and thought, how can this man eat calmly knowing a person killed themselves because of him? How can he sit here in front of his children, pretending to be a normal family man, hardworking, honest? "These beans are bland, Tiana," he commented. I got up quickly, grabbed the salt shaker, placed it in front of him. My hands were shaking. "You're nervous today." "Did something happen?" he asked, looking at me with those eyes that now seemed like a stranger's. "No, nothing. Just tired." He continued eating, but I felt him watching. After dinner, he went to take a shower. Marianne went to study in her room. Joey went to listen to the radio. I stayed washing dishes, my hands plunged in soapy water, and I cried silently, tears falling mixed with the water from the sink. I went to bed early, before he came out of the shower. I pretended I was sleeping when he lay down next to me. I felt his weight sinking the mattress. I felt the smell of the cologne he put on after showering, a smell that before brought me comfort, but now made me nauseous. He turned off the light and was quiet. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing controlled, pretending to sleep, but inside I was panicking. I was lying next to a violent man, a criminal, and he didn't know I knew. I couldn't sleep almost at all that night. I kept turning from one side to the other, careful not to wake him. Every time he moved, I froze in fear. What if he suspected something? What if he had noticed I was different? The following nights were the same. I lived in constant tension. Every time the phone rang, I froze. Every time someone knocked on the door, I thought, it's the other loan sharks coming to look for the notebooks, or it's the victims coming for revenge. Albertino was also different, more nervous, quieter. He didn't go out the following Saturday, the second Saturday without cards. He stayed home restless, pacing back and forth. He answered the phone 3 times and always said the same thing. We'll meet next week to decide. For now, everyone stays quiet. On Monday, he left earlier for work, but I saw through the window. He didn't go toward the shop, he went the opposite way. He was meeting with the others, I'm sure. I was going crazy, couldn't eat properly, was losing weight, wasn't sleeping. Lived startled. Marianne asked if I was sick. Joey said I looked like a ghost. I said it was just tiredness, that it would pass soon, but it didn't pass. How would it pass? I was living a lie, living with a man I didn't know, and I had those notebooks hidden in the sink with proof of terrible crimes, and I didn't know what to do with them. Until one Thursday, 8 days after Mrs. Conception had come here, something happened that changed everything. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I was in the backyard, hanging clothes. Albertino had come back from work early again. He was doing this every week. He was inside the house. I thought he was in the bedroom, resting. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise coming from the sink area. I went to look and almost died of a heart attack. It was him, Albertino, messing around under the sink. He was taking out the buckets, the soap, looking for something. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned, and his face was that way I had seen at Mr. Oswald's wake, hard, cold, dangerous. "I'm looking for something that should be here. Did you see any bag, any package around here?" My blood froze. He knew. Somehow he knew the notebooks were here. "What bag? What are you talking about?" He stood up, came close to me, very close. For the first time in 15 years of marriage, I felt afraid of him. Real fear. "Don't pretend you don't know, Tiana. Mrs. Conception was here. Waldemar saw her leaving here that day. What did she give you? What did she show you?" I thought about lying, about saying I didn't know anything, but I knew it wouldn't help. He would search the whole house, would find the notebooks, and then it would be worse. "She showed me some notebooks," I said, and my voice came out shaky. Notebooks with people's names, with debts. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, there was a rage in those eyes that terrified me. "Where are the notebooks, Tiana?" "I don't know. She took them away. It was quick." He grabbed me by the arm, squeezing hard, hurting me. "Don't lie to me. She left the notebooks here. Where did you hide them?" I tried to break free, but he squeezed harder and harder. For the first time, I saw the violent man his victims saw, the man who ordered brutal collections, who broke fingers, who destroyed lives. "Let me go. You're hurting me. I'll do much more than hurt you if you don't give me those notebooks now." The boys weren't home, thank God. Marianne had gone to a friend's house, Joey was at football practice, little Paul at work. It was just me and him, and I was afraid of what he was capable of doing. "It's under the sink," I said, crying. "In the back, under the boards." He let me go with force, throwing me to the side, and went straight there. He took everything out, ripped out the boards, and pulled out the bag. He opened it frantically, started leafing through the notebooks, checking if everything was there. "Did you read?" he asked without looking at me. I did. He stopped, closed the notebook he was holding, and finally looked at me. "Then you know." "I know. I know everything. I know you're a loan shark, that you lend money to poor people charging absurd interest rates, that you order beatings of those who don't pay, that you destroyed entire families, that because of you a man killed himself." He didn't deny anything, just stood there, holding those damn notebooks. "It was business, Tiana, just business. Those people needed money, we gave it. That's how the world works." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He talked as if it were normal, as if it were something acceptable. Business? You call business breaking a man's fingers, burning a family man's market stall, taking a seamstress's sewing machine that she needed to support her children? They knew the risks when they borrowed the money. Nobody forced them to do anything. They were desperate, needed money for doctor, for food, for medicine, and you took advantage of their desperation. He took a step in my direction, and I saw that cold, calculating man I didn't know. "You enjoyed the money well, didn't you? Never complained about the refrigerator, the television, the car, the new clothes? You used everything, enjoyed everything. So don't come now playing Saint, Tiana. You're guilty too." That hit me like a punch in the stomach, because it was true. I had used that money, had benefited from it, without knowing the origin, but I had used it and that made me complicit in some way. "I didn't know," I said, crying. "I didn't know where the money came from." "But now you know, and what are you going to do? Are you going to report me? Are you going to run to the police?" He came even closer, and now I was cornered between him and the wall. "Let me explain something to you, Tiana. If you go to the police, you'll go to jail too, because you used the money. You're my wife, live in the same house, use the same goods. In the eyes of the law, you're an accomplice. And you know what will happen to our children if we both go to jail? They'll be on the street, they'll go hungry, they'll suffer." He was threatening me with our own children. "And there's more," he continued. "I have protection. I have a police detective who gets his cut every month. If you try to report me, he'll know before the chief even does. And then, Tiana, then you'll have an accident. You'll fall down the stairs, you'll cut yourself in the kitchen, you'll have some sudden health problem. These things happen." He was threatening to kill me. My own husband was saying he'd kill me if I reported him. "So that's how it's going to be?" I asked, still crying, but now with an anger growing inside me. "You're going to keep destroying families and I have to stay quiet, pretending I don't know anything?" "Exactly. You're going to stay quiet, you're going to keep taking care of the house and the boys, and you're going to forget you saw these notebooks. I'm going to keep them in a safe place where you'll never find them, and life continues as it always has been." "And the man who killed himself? And the families who lost everything doesn't mean anything to you?" He stuffed the notebooks into the bag and looked at me with a contempt that made me feel smaller than nothing. "It means they were weak. Weak people don't survive in this world, Tiana. It's been like this forever. The strong win, the weak lose. I chose to be strong." In that moment, I understood something. I didn't know that man, never had. I had lived 15 years married to a mask, and now the mask had fallen. And what was behind it was a monster. He left the backyard taking the bag, went into the house, grabbed the car keys and left. Didn't even look back. I stayed there in the backyard, leaning against the wall, crying from fear, from anger, from shame, from helplessness. What was I going to do? I was trapped. If I reported, he'd kill me. If I stayed quiet, I'd be complicit in horrible crimes for the rest of my life. And worse, he was right about one thing. I had used that money, had benefited. Even without knowing, I had been sustained by other people's suffering. And that shamed me more than anything else. I stayed there until it got dark. When the boys arrived, I washed my face, pretended everything was fine, made dinner. Albertino didn't come back for dinner. He arrived late at night, went straight to the bedroom, lay with his back to me. In the following days, he completely ignored me. He'd talk to me only when necessary, in front of the children. But when we were alone, he'd look at me with that warning look. Don't you dare do anything. I was broken inside, saw no way out. Thought about running away, about taking the boys and disappearing. But where to? With what money? How was I going to support 3 children alone? A separated woman back then was cause for scandal, social exclusion. Nobody would rent a house to a woman without a husband. Nobody gave decent jobs. I thought about telling someone, my mother, a friend, the priest. But what if I told and the person went to talk to Albertino? What if the news spread and reached the corrupt cop? I was in a prison without bars, but still a prison. Until one morning, 2 weeks after all this, I was at the market buying vegetables when a woman approached me. She was older, must have been about 60 years old, thin, with simple but clean clothes. "Are you Albertino's wife?" she asked quietly. My heart froze. I knew what was coming. "I am. My name is Mrs. Aparecida." My husband's name was Raul Tavares, the wife of the man who had hanged himself. His widow was in front of me. I'm sorry," I started to say, but she interrupted me. "Do you know what your husband did to mine? Do you know they broke his fingers, that he couldn't work anymore, that he killed himself because he couldn't take the debt and threats anymore?" I was shaking. People around were starting to look. "I found out recently," I said quietly. "I didn't know any of this before. I swear." She looked at me with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Well, now you know. And I want you to know one more thing. I'm not the only one. There are more than 30 families that were destroyed by this group of loan sharks, and we're organizing. We're going after justice, with the police or without the police. You should get out of that house while there's still time." And she left, leaving me there standing in the middle of the market, with the shopping bag in my hand, and my world collapsing. That night I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything. The notebooks, the victims, my husband, that woman at the market, my children. And I made a decision. I couldn't stay quiet. I couldn't live the rest of my life knowing I had been complicit in this. But I also couldn't simply go to the police, because Albertino would kill me, and the children would be orphans. I needed help. I needed someone who was stronger than fear, stronger than threats, stronger than Albertino. And I knew exactly who to look for. On Friday morning, as soon as Albertino left for work and the boys went to school, I put on my best dress, that navy blue one with white buttons that I wore to go to Mass. I pinned my hair back and left the house. I went straight to St. Jude's Church, 3 blocks from home. It was a small, simple church with worn wooden benches and a large crucifix behind the altar. I had attended that church since I got married. I knew every corner, every saint's image, every stained glass window. Father Anselm was in the sacristy, arranging the vestments for noon Mass. He was an elderly man, must have been about 65 years old, white hair, thick-rimmed glasses, always with that calm and welcoming manner. He had baptized my 3 children, had blessed my marriage, had given Marianne her first communion. When he saw me coming in, he smiled. "Mrs. Tiana, what a nice surprise. Did you come to help prepare the flowers for Sunday's Mass?" I closed the door behind me and locked it. His smile disappeared when he saw the expression on my face. "Father Anselm, I need to confess something, but it's not confession of my sin. It's something else, and I need your help." He took off his glasses, cleaned them on his robes, put them back on, and indicated a chair. "Sit here, my daughter. Tell me what's happening." And I told him everything. Absolutely everything. The card Saturdays that weren't card games. Mrs. Conception showing up with the notebooks, the destroyed lives, the man who had hanged himself, the confrontation with Albertino, The threats, the corrupt cop, the widow who had approached me at the market, everything. I cried while I talked, the words coming out rushed, years of anguish pouring out there in the sacristy. Father Anselm listened in silence, his face increasingly grave, his hands clasped on the table. When I finished, I waited for him to say something. It took a few minutes. He got up, went to the small window in the sacristy that faced the church garden, stood there looking outside. I already suspected something was wrong happening in the neighborhood, he said finally. In recent years, several people came here asking for help, saying they owed money to loan sharks, that they were being threatened. I helped as I could. Gave food baskets, paid some small bills with the church's money, but I didn't know it was so organized like this. And I never imagined Albertino. He turned to me. You're in danger, Mrs. Tiana. If your husband finds out you came to talk to me, if he knows you're thinking about reporting. I know, Father, I know I'm in danger, but I can't take living with this anymore. I can't sleep in the same bed as that man anymore. I can't look at my children anymore, knowing that everything we have was stolen from poor people. I need to do something. He came back close to me, pulled a chair, sat in front of me. What do you want to do, my daughter? I want to report. I want the police to arrest them, to return what they stole, to pay for what they did. But Albertino said he has a cop protecting them, and I'm afraid to go to the station and fall right into that cop's hands. Then I'll die, and my children will be motherless. Father Anselm was thoughtful, running his hand on his chin. I know a district attorney, he said after a while. He's from the diocese, helps the church with legal matters. Serious man of integrity. He has no connection with the local police. If you want, I can arrange a conversation with him. But, Mrs. Tiana, you have to understand one thing. If you do this, there's no going back. Your life will turn upside down. You might lose your house, your goods, your marriage will end. It might take time for them to believe you. They might try to incriminate you along with them. It's a very difficult path. I know, Father, but staying quiet is also killing me. It's killing me inside. He took my hands with those old, calloused hands. Then, let's do this. I'll talk to the DA today, and you're going to talk to Mrs. Conception and other victims, because this can't be just you against them. It needs to be a bigger movement, needs to have several voices. The more people report, the harder it will be for them to cover it up. He was right. I alone was weak, but together, the victims and I, we had a chance. There's another thing, the father continued. Next Sunday there's the 10 o'clock Mass, which is the fullest. About 200 people come, lots of people from the neighborhood, including several of the families who were harmed by these loan sharks. If you want to make a public denunciation, a testimony in front of everyone, I can give you that space. But it has to be you, Mrs. Tiana. It has to be the wife of one of them speaking, because then no one can say it's a lie. My heart almost stopped. Speak at church, in front of everyone, in front of neighbors, acquaintances, other wives, the loan sharks. What if Albertino was there? What if he did something right there? I don't know if I can, Father, speaking in public like that. Nobody's forcing you, my daughter. It's your choice. But think carefully. If you only report in court, it could take months, years for something to happen. And in that time, they continue operating, continue destroying families. But if you expose them publicly, if the whole neighborhood knows who the loan sharks are, they lose power because their strength comes from secrecy, comes from the fear people have of speaking. If you break that silence, you end them. I knew he was right, but speaking in public, exposing my own shame, admitting I had been sustained by dirty money, was asking too much. Let me think about it, was all I could say. I left the church with my legs shaking. I went home on autopilot, not even seeing the way. When I arrived, I sat at the kitchen table and stayed there still, thinking. Did I have the courage to do that? To go up to the altar? To take the microphone? To tell everyone the truth about my husband, about myself? I spent the weekend in a state of terrible tension. Albertino continued ignoring me. On Saturday, he left in the morning and only came back at night. Didn't say where he went. I didn't ask. We lived like two strangers in the same house. On Sunday, I said I was going to the 10 o'clock Mass. He didn't even respond. He was reading the newspaper in the living room, didn't even look up. I arrived at church half an hour early. Father Anselm was waiting for me. He took me to the sacristy and introduced me to two women who were there. One of them was Mrs. Conception, the other was Mrs. Aparecida, the widow of the man who had hanged himself. "Mrs. Tiana," the father said, "they want to talk to you." Mrs. Conception came to me and hugged me. It was the first time we'd seen each other since that day she had brought the notebooks. "Thank you for being here," she said. "Thank you for having courage." Mrs. Aparecida stayed a little more distant, arms crossed, looking at me with distrust. "The father told me you want to report your husband," she said. "Why? Remorse, guilt, or fear of losing your goods when they arrest him?" The question hurt, but it was fair. I deserved that distrust. "Guilt? Yes," I answered. "A lot of guilt, because I used the money that came from your family's suffering, ma'am, and so many others. I didn't know, but I used it, and that shames me more than anything. I can't undo what was done. I can't bring your husband back, but I can make them pay for what they did. And that's what I want." She looked at me for a long time, looking for falseness, looking for lies, then slowly nodded. "The father said you're thinking about speaking at Mass today, in front of everyone." "I'm thinking, but I'm very afraid." "Afraid of what? Of your husband, of the other loan sharks?" "Of everything, of everyone looking at me as a criminal's wife." "As an accomplice," she completed. "Yes." She took a step toward me. "Then let me tell you something, Mrs. Tiana. When my husband killed himself, everyone looked at me with pity, but also with judgment. Why did she let it get to that point, they thought. Why didn't he ask for help? As if the guilt was ours, the victims. Do you know what it's like to have to bury your husband knowing he killed himself because he saw no way out? Do you know what it's like to explain to your children that their father couldn't take living anymore?" Her voice was choked now. "I know you're also a victim of your husband, Mrs. Tiana. He deceived you, used you, put you in a horrible position. But the difference between you and us is that you still have a choice. You can still do something. My husband didn't have that choice. He was already dead inside even before he hanged himself." I was crying. She was crying. Mrs. Conception was crying. Father Anselm watched us in silence. "If you go up to that altar today and tell the truth," Mrs. Aparecida continued, "you'll be giving voice to all the families that were destroyed. You'll be telling these men that their time is up, and you'll be saving other people from going through what we went through." She grabbed my hand, squeezed it tight. "So have courage for my Raoul, for the other victims, and for yourself." In that moment, I knew what I had to do. "I'm going to speak," I said. "I'm going to tell everything." Father Anselm nodded. "Then let's do this. I'll do the normal Mass. At the moment of community announcements, after communion, I'll call you to speak. You go up, take the microphone, and speak what's in your heart, without fear. God is with you." The three women left the sacristy to sit in the church. I stayed a little longer trying to calm my heart that was racing. I looked at the crucifix on the wall. Jesus suffering on the cross. If he had managed to endure so much pain, so much injustice, I could also endure what would come. The Mass began. I sat in the back alone. The church was really full, as the father had said. More than 200 people. I saw many familiar faces. Mrs. Zelda, my neighbor, Mr. Manuel from the grocery store, Mrs. Regina, who sold bread, entire families, children, elderly. I looked around looking for Albertino. He wasn't there, thank God. If he were, I don't know if I'd have courage. But I saw Mr. Maurice sitting with his wife and children in the front. I saw Mr. Waldemar with his family in the middle of the church. I saw Mr. George a few rows ahead of me. The other loan sharks were there calm, singing the hymns, praying the prayers, pretending to be good men. The Mass continued, gospel reading, Father's homily, offertory, consecration, communion. I participated in everything on autopilot. the prayers coming out of my mouth, but my head far away, mentally rehearsing what I was going to say. Then came the moment of announcements. Father Anselm went up to the altar, took the microphone, and started talking about the week's activities, about the prayer group, about catechism. Then he stopped, looked at me in the back and said, "Before we close, we have a testimony from a sister of the community. Mrs. Sebastiana, please come up here." My heart almost jumped out of my mouth. People started looking around, looking for who this Mrs. Sebastiana was. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking so much I thought I was going to fall. I started walking down the center aisle. It was the longest walk of my life. Each step seemed to weigh a ton. I felt everyone's eyes on me. I heard the whispers. Who is she? What's she going to say? Isn't she Albertino's wife? When I passed near where Mr. Maurice was sitting, I saw him looking at me with wide eyes, then whispering something in his wife's ear. Mr. Waldemar also saw me and got tense. They knew something was wrong. I climbed the 3 steps of the altar. Father Anselm handed me the microphone. I held it with both hands because I was shaking so much I was afraid I'd drop it. I looked at that sea of faces looking at me, waiting. I took a deep breath and started speaking. My name is Sebastiana. Many of you know me as Mrs. Tiana, wife of Albertino, mother of little Paul, Marianne, and Joey. I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years. I've attended this church since I got married. My voice was shaky, but it was coming out. I continued. I came here today to make a public confession and ask for forgiveness. Absolute silence in the church. No child made noise. For 15 years, my husband went out every Saturday saying he was going to play cards with friends. I believed, never suspected. But a few weeks ago, I discovered the truth. I saw Mr. Maurice get up discreetly, as if to leave. But Father Anselm signaled to 2 men who were at the doors. They were members of the pastoral that he had warned beforehand. They closed the doors. No one was going to leave. The truth is that my husband didn't play cards. He and a group of men from this neighborhood operated a loan sharking scheme. They lent money to poor people, desperate people, charging 20–30% interest per month. And when these people couldn't pay, they'd take their belongings, humiliate them, threaten them. And worse, my voice failed, but I forced myself to continue. And worse, they beat the victims, broke fingers, burned market stalls, destroyed homes. And because of this, a man, a family man, an honest worker, killed himself because he couldn't take the pressure anymore. Now there were people crying in the church, others with their mouths open, in shock. I saw several families looking at each other, recognizing they had also been victims. I used the money that came from this suffering, I continued, tears streaming down my face. Bought a refrigerator, television, renovated the house, everything with dirty money. I didn't know where it came from, but that doesn't exempt me. I should have asked, should have suspected. And now I come here in front of all of you to ask forgiveness for my omissions. I looked directly at where Mrs. Aparecida was sitting. I especially ask forgiveness from the family of Mr. Raul Tavares, who lost his life because of this criminal scheme. I saw Mrs. Aparecida crying, but nodding. And I want everyone to know who these men are. I want them to know they're here now, in this church pretending to be good people. I pointed at Mr. Maurice. That one there is one of them, Mr. Maurice. He turned red, tried to protest, but the people around were already moving away from him, looking with disgust. And Mr. Waldemar and Mr. George. I went on naming each one. Their wives were in shock. Some got up indignant, others tried to leave, but the doors were blocked by the pastoral men. And the leader of them all is my husband, Albertino. He coordinated the collections, authorized the violence, kept the records of everything. The commotion in the church was growing, people shouting, cursing, crying. Father Anselm asked for calm, but it was hard to control. I have proof of everything, I shouted into the microphone. I have the notebooks with the names of more than 300 families that were harmed, and these proofs are going to justice. There won't be protection from corrupt cops to stop it, because now the whole neighborhood knows, and you're all witnesses." It was chaos. People stood up, surrounded the loan sharks, shouted, cursed. Their wives cried with shame. Father Anselm had to go up to the altar and ask for order, threatening to call the police if they didn't calm down. I came down from the altar shaking. Mrs. Conception and Mrs. Aparecida came running to support me. Other women, victims I didn't even know, came to thank me, hug me, cry with me. "You were very brave," Mrs. Aparecida said. "Very brave." Father Anselm managed to calm people down and ended the mass quickly. The loan sharks ran out as soon as they opened the doors, pushed and cursed by people. Their wives stayed behind, humiliated, crying, not knowing what to do. I knew that when I got home, hell was going to start, but I had done it, had had courage, had exposed the truth, and now there was no turning back. I didn't go home after Mass, didn't have courage. I knew Albertino must already know everything. Someone had already run to tell him for sure, and I was afraid of what he'd be capable of doing. Father Anselm took me to the parish house, a small room in the back of the church, where sometimes a nun or missionary passing through would stay. He told me to stay there, that I was safe, that there were people watching. Mrs. Conception brought some food, but I couldn't eat anything. I could only think about my children. Little Paul was working, Marianne had gone to her friend's house, Joey was at practice. They weren't home when everything happened at Mass, but they'd come back. They'd find their angry father alone. What if he took it out on them? I was desperate. The father noticed and said, "Mrs. Tiana, I already sent Alberto, a young man from the pastoral, to get your children. He'll bring them here. We'll explain everything calmly. They need to know the truth." And that's what happened. Around 2 p.m, all 3 arrived confused, scared. When they saw me there in that little room crying, they got even more desperate. "Mom, what happened? Where's Dad? Why are you here?" little Paul asked. I sat all 3 down and told them everything, absolutely everything. The loan sharks, the dirty money, the victims, the man who had killed himself, my denunciation at Mass. Marianne cried copiously. Joey was in shock, not understanding properly. Little Paul, at 19 years old, turned red with rage. "It can't be true. Dad wouldn't do this. Dad is a hard worker, honest." "It's true, my son. I have the proof. I saw everything written in the notebooks. And this morning at Mass, I told the whole neighborhood." "You did what?" he almost shouted. "You reported our father in front of everyone." "Mom, do you know what's going to happen to us now?" I knew. I knew our lives had ended as they were. I knew they'd judge us, point at us on the street, exclude us, but I also knew it was the right thing to do. "I know, Paul, and I'm sorry for dragging you into this. But I couldn't live knowing all that and staying quiet anymore. I couldn't." Marianne, always more sensitive, came to hug me. "You did the right thing, Mom. You were very brave." We stayed there at the parish house until nightfall. Father Anselm brought blankets, arranged places for us to sleep, said we could stay there as long as necessary. On Monday morning, he took me to meet the district attorney, Dr. Henry. He was a serious man, about 40 years old, with a briefcase full of documents. I told everything again, in detail. He took notes, asked specific things, asked for names, dates. "Where are the notebooks you mentioned?" he asked. My heart tightened. "My husband took them back, hid them somewhere." He sighed. "Without the notebooks, it'll be harder, but not impossible. We have your testimony, and if we get more victims willing to speak—" "I can get them," I said. "I know several, Mrs. Conception, Mrs. Aparecida. There are others who came to me after Mass." And that's what we did. We spent the entire week gathering victims, collecting testimonies, putting together evidence. They were horrible stories, one after another. Mrs. Maria, who had lost her sewing machine and couldn't work anymore. Mr. Joseph, who had been beaten and was left with injuries. Mrs. Clara, who had been threatened in front of her small children. Dr. Henry requested a formal investigation. They discovered the corrupt cop was a detective named Cardoso, who indeed received bribes from the loan sharks. He was immediately removed and also became a target of investigation. Meanwhile, I didn't go back home. I stayed almost 2 weeks at the parish house with the children. Until one day Father Anselm called me. "Mrs. Tiana, the police went to your house this morning with a search warrant. They found the notebooks. Albertino had hidden them in the ceiling lining of the bedroom. He was arrested along with the other 3. My heart was divided. On one hand, relief. They wouldn't be able to do harm to anyone anymore. On the other, pain. He was still the father of my children, still the man I had lived with for 15 years. And now, I asked, now you can go back home if you want, but Mrs. Tiana, I need to warn you. The house, the car, everything will be confiscated by justice. They're products of crime. You'll have to leave there." I already expected this, but hearing it out loud hurt just the same. I went back home that day just to get our clothes, some personal items, documents. I entered that house that had been mine for so many years and felt like it belonged to someone else. The refrigerator, the television, the formica table, everything seemed dirty now, stained with blood and tears of innocent people. I took only the essentials. Clothes, photos of the children when they were small, my grandmother's Bible, some old pots. I left everything that had been bought with dirty money. Didn't want any of it anymore. A neighbor, Mrs. Irene, who had always been good to me, offered a little room in the back of her house. It was tiny, fit only a double bed and a mattress on the floor. But she didn't charge rent, just asked that I help with the cleaning of her house. That's where we moved to, me, Marianne, and Joey, in a space smaller than our old living room. Little Paul went to live with his girlfriend and her family. He was ashamed, was still angry at me, said I had destroyed the family. The first months were the worst of my life. The entire neighborhood talked. Some supported me, said I had been brave, but many judged me. "What kind of woman reports her own husband?" they whispered when I passed. She should have stayed quiet, resolved it at home. Now she's going through hardship, serves her right. Some people spat in my path. Some mothers forbade their daughters from playing with Marianne. Some stores refused to sell me on credit. It was as if I were the criminal, not them. But there were also good people, many good people, the victims especially. Mrs. Aparecida showed up at Mrs. Irene's house a week after we moved, bringing a bag of rice, beans, oil, sugar. "I know you're in need," she said. "And I want you to know my family is eternally grateful for what you did." Mrs. Conception got me a job as a seamstress in a workshop her niece had. It paid little, but it was honest. I sewed from 7 in the morning to 6 in the afternoon, came back to that little room, made dinner on the hot plate Mrs. Irene lent, helped Joey with homework, talked to Marianne about her plans to finish her studies. It was a hard life, much harder than before. I woke up early, slept late, my hands got calloused from sewing so much, my back hurt from being bent over the machine. Sometimes there were days the money didn't stretch, and we'd eat only rice with eggs. There was a winter we were cold because we didn't have enough blankets. But you know what was different? I slept in peace. For the first time in months, years maybe, I could sleep through the night without nightmares, without that weight on my chest, because the money I earned, as little as it was clean. It came from my work, my effort, didn't have anyone's blood on it. The trial against the loan sharks took almost a year. There were hearings, there were testimonies, there were lawyers trying to free them, saying it was all lies, that the victims were making it up, but the proof from the notebooks was irrefutable. It was all there written in Mr. Oswald's own handwriting, the debts, the collections, the violence. In September 1974, the sentence came out. Albertino got 8 years in prison. Maurice and George 6 years each. Waldemar 5. Detective Cardoso was expelled from the police and got 4 years. On the day of sentencing, I was there in the courtroom. Albertino looked at me from the defendant's bench. It was no longer that cold, calculating look I had seen when he threatened me. It was a look of defeat, of anger, but also of something that seemed like regret. I don't know. I'll never know. The last time I spoke with him was a few months later, when he sent a request for me to bring the children to visit him in prison. Little Paul refused, Marianne too. Only Joey, who was younger, still had that hope that his father would go back to being who he thought he was. I took the boy, waited outside. When they came out, Joey was crying. He apologized, Mom. Said he was wrong, that he was weak, that it started small, and when he saw he was already in deep. It might have been true, it might have been manipulation. I don't know, and it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that he paid for what he did, and the victims had some justice, even though it would never be enough to compensate for the suffering. Life continued slowly, one day at a time. Marianne finished her studies, got a job as a secretary at a company downtown, helped with expenses. Joey grew up, became a hard-working young man, never wanted to follow his father's path. Little Paul took time, but eventually came back to talk to me. Apologized for blaming me. I kept sewing. Years later, with the money I saved, I managed to rent a small house, just ours. It didn't have a colorful refrigerator, didn't have a big television, didn't have a car, but it had dignity, it had peace. And you know what was most surprising? The victims never forgot me. When I needed something, there was always someone offering help. When Marianne got married in 1978, it was they who threw the party. Each one brought a dish, decorated the church hall, bought the wedding dress. It was simple, but it was beautiful. It was made with true love. When Joey got sick in 1980 and needed expensive medicine, it was they who did a fundraiser and bought it. When I was unemployed for a few months in 1982, it was they who sustained me until I found another job. We formed a network, a family that wasn't by blood, but was of respect, of gratitude, of humanity. And that was worth more than any refrigerator, any car, any beautiful house. Albertino got out of prison in 1980 after serving 6 years, had a sentence reduction for good behavior. He tried to look for me once. I refused to see him. He left the neighborhood. I heard he went to another city. Never heard from him again. The children had sporadic contact, but little. The wounds were too deep. I never remarried, didn't want to. I dedicated my life to my children, to my work, to the true friendships I built. And it was a good life. It wasn't easy, it wasn't comfortable, but it was dignified. Today, at 78 years old, I look back and don't regret anything. I'd do it all again, the same way, because I learned something that many people take a lifetime to learn. Material goods you lose, money you spend, house you change, but your conscience, your dignity, your character, nobody takes that from you. That you carry until your last day. There were nights I slept on the cold floor, hungry, afraid of the next day, but I slept in peace because I had done the right thing. Had given voice to those who had no voice, had faced fear and oppression. And that, my people, that's worth more than all the gold in the world. Today my children are successful, honest, hard-working adults. Marianne is a manager at a company. Little Paul has an auto repair shop, but different from his grandfather. He's honest, fair with employees. Joey is a public school teacher, teaches math to underprivileged children. They tell me they're grateful I had courage that day, that if I hadn't done that, they would have grown up thinking it was all okay, that that type of conduct was acceptable, and maybe they would have followed the same path. I have 6 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. They all know the story. I tell them without hiding anything. I tell about the mistakes, the shame, the suffering, but I also tell about overcoming, courage, reconstruction. And you know what they tell me? Grandma, you're our hero. I'm not a hero. Heroes are those people who do extraordinary things. I just did what anyone should do, the right thing, even when it was difficult, even when it cost everything. So I leave here my message for you who are listening. If one day you find yourself in a situation where you need to choose between what's easy and what's right, choose right always. It might hurt in the moment, it might cost a lot, it might seem like you're losing everything, but in the end, when you lay your head on the pillow, you'll sleep in peace. And that peace, my people, is priceless. Don't let yourselves be bought by material comfort. Don't close your eyes to injustice. Don't stay quiet when you see evil happening. Because when we stay quiet, we become accomplices. I could have stayed quiet. Could have continued living in my comfortable house with my appliances, my car, pretending I didn't know anything. It would have been easier. It would have been more convenient, but I couldn't live with myself. And at the end of the day, it's with yourself that you have to live every day until your last breath. So have courage, be strong, and above all, be dignified. Because dignity, once lost, is very hard to recover. But once preserved, it sustains you through the hardest moments of life. This is my story. It's a story of pain, of shame, of loss. But it's also a story of courage, of reconstruction, of hope. And if my story can inspire even one person to do the right thing, then it was worth coming here to tell it. Thank you for listening to me with patience, from the heart. If this story touched your heart, if you were moved, if this inspired you in some way, please leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel The Grandma's Diary to hear more real stories of overcoming like this one, and share with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to start over no matter how difficult it is. A warm hug from this grandma who learned that life isn't about what you have, but about who you are. God bless you.